Yeah, I think that when you do that, you know, I mean, as I said, we attack them, we start dropping bombs on them, and now, they now want to come, to the aid of their government, even if they had problems with them before.
Yeah.
It's their own patriotism, their own, we're the big bad Satan that's flexing our muscle, and we're invading this country.
Peter, good to speak to you. It's been a long time. Last time we were speaking, it was much better circumstances, better times, more stable times, and everyone was talking about the war in Ukraine. Now we just recovered from talking about Venezuela, and we've got a war in Iran to talk about. And I'm excited for this conversation because most people are looking at, you're trying to make sense of the war by looking at what's happening with Israel, what's happening in the region. The way I look at it is, it's the economy, stupid. I think commodities, oil and gas, and economic mindsets are dictating what happens next. But let's start with your general thoughts on the war and how it's going so far, and why you think Trump made the decision to attack.
Well, I mean, first of all, I think that all wars need to be declared by Congress. I've always been opposed to war where the president makes a decision on their own to take the country to war. That's clearly contradictory to the clear language of the Constitution, the intent of the framers. The idea was that war was to be a last resort. I mean, war was to be avoided at all cost. And if absolutely necessary, okay, we could go to war. But it was supposed to be the result of a deliberative process by Congress. So one individual could not just decide, hey, let's go to war. We didn't give that kind of power to the president. Yes, the president is the commander in chief of the army, but that doesn't mean he can command the army into a war. Congress needs to declare the war. And then after that, yes, the president commands the army in a war that Congress has authorized, but the president cannot take it upon himself. Now, some people think, well, we have the War Powers Act. We have a lot of history of presidents committing U.S. troops into combat engagement without a declaration of war. And in most of those cases, it's a kind of a surgical attack. Either it's in response to a threat where somebody has attacked us, or a particular attack is imminent. Or if you go and look at what Trump did, 6 months ago, 8 months ago, with taking out the installation that was supposedly working on nuclear weapons. Trump, authorized the bombing of that. But it was not a war. He made it clear, look, we just want to take this out, and that's it. We're not going to do anything else. You can go about your business, Iran. We're not going to, this is all we're doing. So please don't retaliate. Don't do anything to escalate this. We don't want war. We just don't want you to have these nuclear weapons. And we thought we needed to take this installation out. And you can even argue that it's an act of war, but Trump's goal was not war. Trump's goal was, we just want to get rid of this. In fact, when he went in to Venezuela, he said, this is a police action. We need to arrest this guy. He's a fugitive, right? It's not war. We're just trying to help the government arrest this criminal. And so there was a justification there. But if you look at what Trump has said about his goals, his objectives with what's happening with Iran, he wants to completely obliterate the entire government. He wants to destroy all of their military capability. And he wants to allow the people of Iran to select an entirely new government from the one that they have now, right? So he wants to get rid of the government, get rid of the military. That sounds like war to me, right? It's not like and so he should have run this by Congress. And when people want to say, well, we needed the element of surprise, that's a bunch of nonsense. I mean, we've been talking about this. It was obvious something was going to happen. The troops were moving around. I mean, I'm sure Iran was not surprised that they were attacked. Maybe they were surprised by the day. They might not have known exactly when they were going to get attacked, but I think it was pretty obvious that something was going to happen. So Trump could have gone to Congress, made his case for why he believes that we need to go to war with Iran, and let Congress vote on it. If Congress had voted on, to go to war, I would at least say, okay, yeah, we're allowed to do it. But Trump did not go to Congress, and probably because he knew that Congress would not be persuaded by whatever intelligence they claim to have that we needed to go to war. Because I do believe that it's going to end up being a mistake. Just like everything we've done in the Middle East has been a mistake. Excuse me. And Donald Trump, up until he launched a war against Iran, agreed with me. Everything that I've heard the president say, as a private citizen, as a presidential candidate, as a sitting president, was he doesn't want to take us into war in the Middle East, and specifically against Iran. He was opposed to it. In fact, on many occasions, he said that he thought Obama would attack Iran just to create a distraction, because he needed something. He was having trouble with the economy, with his poll numbers for re-election. And so he accused former President Obama of potentially going to war with Iran, under false pretense. And that may be exactly what he has done now. And I don't know why.
Why? Yeah, exactly. That's my next question, is what led him to make that decision? Because it just seems like a massive shift in his mindset strategy from being the peace president and ending wars to now starting the biggest war the U.S. has been part of in I don't know how many years.
Yeah, he already mentioned that he was pissed off that he didn't get the Nobel Peace Prize. And supposedly he was using that to justify potentially invading Greenland, which, he backed off of, but he never should have publicly made it known that he was even contemplating something like that. I think that did a lot of damage to the U.S. But yeah, I mean, I don't know what caused the president to do a complete 180 on war with Iran. I heard him interviewed today, and he said that the reason that we had to strike was because they were about to strike first, and we needed to preempt that strike. And, I think that's as credible as the weapon of mass destruction in Iraq. I don't think there's any way that Iran was going to start this war, knowing that, they can't win it. I just don't believe that they would deliberately initiate it. And of course, had they done that, that would have been a lot better for us. I mean, Trump says we had to hit them first. Had they hit us first, I think war would have been a lot more justified. And we would have looked a lot better if, we were responding to an attack instead of the initiator. And Iran would look a lot worse. I mean, now a lot of people might sympathize, and they may become sympathetic to Iran as time goes on. If, we're just the aggressor, and Iran is like, look, we're just responding to this aggression. We're just defending ourselves. It would be a completely different story if they were the aggressors. If they attacked us first, they wouldn't even have that narrative to put out there. So I just don't believe that's what happened. So something happened to justify doing this. Now, the skeptic in me would say, look, Trump has been bragging about our great economy, the hottest economy in the world, but the economic data doesn't support that. The GDP numbers were collapsing, jobs were vanishing, inflation was rising and still is. So I think the economy was going to be a lot weaker come the midterm elections. There was also, he lost on the tariffs. The Supreme Court rightly struck down his tariffs. That's a mess now. How
does Iran change that, though, Peter? How does that make it better?
Well, you've got all the stuff with the Epstein files and the people in his administration that have ties and are embarrassed by Epstein. So the way war helps solve all those problems is it creates a distraction that now occupies all the headlines. And so now nobody really wants to talk about the tariffs. Nobody wants to talk about the Epstein files. They want to talk about the war. The war basically sucks all the oxygen out of the room. And now the president just deals with the war. He doesn't have to worry about the rest of it. And two things happen. Number one, Trump gets a scapegoat because a lot of problems that were going to happen anyway with the economy can now be blamed on the war. Hey, look, everything was great, but, we had to go to war. And, one of the sacrifices of war sometimes is you have a recession, you have higher inflation. So it's not my fault. I mean, everything was going to be great, but unfortunately, we had no choice. We had to go, fight this war. And so the weakness in the economy is not my fault, right? Everything would have been great, and it will be great once we end the war.
But he started the war. How's it? If that narrative collapses on itself, because he started the war.
Yes, but if he says I had to, I didn't start. I had no choice, right? Because we were in imminent danger. Iran was about to nuke us, or whatever the hell he's going to say. It's better than if he does nothing and we just get the economy tanking, we get a recession, we get high inflation, and there's no war. Well, obviously, everyone's going to blame him for that. So if he can create the war, then he has, a scapegoat. But the other thing is wartime presidents tend to be popular, want to support the troops. They want to be patriotic. And so that generally means supporting the commander in chief, being on the side of the president during a war. So if you're worried about your popularity and you want to become more popular, let's have a war, be a wartime president. Right? And now you're going to win support from people who are supporting you out of patriotism. So I think there's a lot of advantages to it. Now, yes, the war is going to make an economy that was going to be bad anyway worse. So, does that offset the benefits that Trump gets from having the war and having something to blame the weak economy on, other than having to just accept responsibility for it? Because he took complete ownership of the economy. And so anything that goes wrong, it would be hard for him to say, look, it's Biden's fault. When he said the economy is great and it's because of me, it's because of all these great things I did. Now, I think he had the Fed as a scapegoat. He has the Supreme Court as a scapegoat. But I think the war just gives him another, ace up his sleeve to try to play.
What impact do you think the war will have on the economy? And do you think Trump is prepared or was ready for a prolonged war? Do you think he is ready right now? Is he bluffing when he says the U.S. is ready for a multi-week war?
Well, again, I think Trump is fine with the war going on because he's the commander in chief. And, I think that, that's a big thing for a president when you're at war and you are commanding the forces, So my guess is that Trump likes doing that it makes the job more exciting. And, I don't know. I mean, he's in charge. I mean, it's a big deal being at war.
Is it about the economy? The economy, will it be able to sustain such a war with the increase in energy prices? Will it won't impact the US as much as it will impact Europe and Asia?
Well, as long as we can keep going into debt and, we can sustain it, as long as we can keep borrowing money. But the problem is, if the Fed has to print all the money and we have a lot of inflation, can we sustain that? If we have a run on the dollar, if the world doesn't want to finance it. Over the last couple of days, the dollar has rallied. And if the dollar stays strong, that makes it easier for us to afford to finance the war. But ultimately, whatever money we borrow to pay for the war just adds to our debt problem, because now we have more debt that we can't repay. But it's also possible that the dollar blows up here, that the world does not want to finance this war. The world was already moving away from the dollar before the war started. They were de-dollarizing. That's why the price of gold was at 4,300 before we launched the war, or 5,300. The world was already moving away from the dollar. Foreign central banks were moving away from the dollar. Now, it's possible that this war slows down the exodus from the dollar, but it's also possible it speeds it up. And if it speeds it up, then, we're even less able to continue the war. If it slows it down, that buys us some time. But it's going to mean higher oil prices. That's a certainty. How much higher, it's hard to say. They could end up being a lot higher. And obviously that's problematic, unless you're an oil company. But if you're a typical American consumer, and you're already struggling with things being unaffordable, they're going to get a lot more expensive.
Do you think that the markets have priced in a prolonged war? It doesn't look like it. Oil prices have kind of, there's been some profit taking when it comes to oil prices, which to me dictates that I understand that people priced in the war before it started, which goes back to the point that this isn't a surprise attack that you made initially. But I would have expected oil prices to continue rallying as we see this war ending up to be longer than what was initially planned. There's been reports that Trump planned for a 4-day war, or maybe even ending it by Sunday, Monday. And now we're talking about a war that ends by end of this month or even into next month.
Yeah. I don't think it's priced in at all. I mean, I think people knew something was coming, but I don't think that they knew or priced in any kind of worst case scenario or even anything close to that. And, the markets were near record highs before the war. We weren't quite at a record there, but we were, very close to 50,000 on the Dow when the war started. And we're not that far below 50,000 on the Dow now. I mean, we're around 4,800 or something like that, 48,500. I mean, so we're very close to the highs. So I don't think the market is pricing anything in. And there's a lot of problems that the war can create for the economy and for the markets. And the markets are very expensive.
Sorry.
The markets, the PE on the market is high. So the market is priced, for almost a perfection when it comes to the economy. And clearly we're not going to be anywhere close to that, especially when you're at war. Even if it's a war with, an opponent that we obviously can beat. But the question is, how long is it going to take to win? And what is victory going to be anyway? Because Donald Trump says, he wants to completely obliterate the government so that a brand new government could be formed in the vacuum that we create. But I don't even know how we do that just with dropping bombs. I don't know how we do that without sending troops on the ground. And how long is that going to take? And then the problem is, let's assume we completely get rid of the current government and just leave it up to the Iranian people to pick another government. How do we know they don't pick one even worse?
Yeah.
I mean,
very, very good point.
I mean, it's like, they overthrew the Shah and they got the other Ayatollah, the first one, and he turned out to be way worse than the Shah.
Yeah.
So, and then they got this guy that we just killed. But the next guy, I mean, there's an expression, the devil right? So we're looking at a devil that we have no idea. But I know this, that after we finish bombing them back to the Stone Age or whatever, and we start killing a lot of people, and a lot of the people we kill are not going to be soldiers. There's going to be a lot of civilian casualties.
There's that school that got bombed with like 160 kids or something.
Yes.
Which is heartbreaking.
Yes. And those kids have brothers. Those girls have brothers. And whatever their opinion of America was before their sisters got killed, trust me, they think a lot less of us now. They're going to be a lot more likely to get recruited to be a suicide bomber or something. I mean, they obviously have an axe to grind now against the United States. So we create a lot of enemies. When you you poke into a hornet's nest, and look, there's a lot of ways you can get stung. So I don't know what kind of government is going to replace the one that's there now. But I would not bet that it's going to be very friendly to the United States.
Yeah, well, we're seeing, Trump and his administration are talking about regime change, Peter, but the images we're getting are the complete opposite. Literally, in my feed is popping up right now of people chanting in the streets. But unlike January, this just came in now on my feed as we're speaking, and there's a lot of these. This is a video of them just chanting on the streets. I'll let the producer play it on screen. But it's people are protesting, but not like in January, Peter, where people are protesting for the death of the regime. People are protesting, calling for revenge after the death of Khamenei. So this is doing the opposite of what the intention was in January and what Netanyahu and Trump are calling for. So when I look at this from a...
Yeah, I think that when you do that, as I said, we attack them. We start dropping bombs on them. And now, they now want to come, to the aid of their government, even if they had problems with them before.
Yeah.
It's their own patriotism, their own, we're the big bad Satan that's flexing our muscle, and we're invading this country. They can now take the high ground, which is why, you can say, look, why wait for them to attack us? Well, I don't think they were going to attack us, but if Trump was right and they were going to attack us, we would have been in a much better position fighting back than I believe we are in now.
There is no political analyst that would tell you right now that Iran wanted this war. Iran is already dealing with an internal revolt. They're already dealing with a crumbling economy. The foreign minister kept saying, we don't want this war, we don't want this war. Even the day before the attack, Oman's foreign minister said that Iran accepted all the concessions when it comes to their nuclear program, including sending their enriched uranium to the US. So yes, Iran did not want this war. So then it goes back and begs the question that we were talking about at the beginning. Why? Is there any strategic benefit, not talking about politically for Trump, but any strategic benefit for the US? For example, having control of the Strait of Hormuz. People would make the argument that this is an energy play, that you look at what Trump did in the Panama Canal, kicking China out. Look what he's trying to do with Greenland, trying to control the passageway there for oil exports to China. And then look what he did in Venezuela, getting a regime that's more friendly with the US. And he could be doing the same thing with Iran. So then he'll have full control of the Strait of Hormuz, or some control of the Strait of Hormuz, and the one in the Red Sea, the Bab el-Mandeb Straits. And then that would position the US from a strategic perspective, give it a hold on the oil and gas import and exports globally, and be able to pressure China as well if ever it gets to it.
Well, look, there was no problem with ships traveling through the Straits of Hormuz before the war. Now they can't go. Now there's basically an effective blockade.
But if there's a better regime, a better regime that's more cooperative with the US, it gives the US more influence over the straits to be able to. But they were open
anyway. There's trade going through. So I don't know what interest Iran would have served itself by trying to put a stop to that commerce when everybody in the region is benefiting from the trade that is passing through that strait. But now, obviously, nobody's going through because Iran is gonna shoot down any boats or sink any boats that try to pass. So now we have a problem. I don't know what the U.S. strategic thinks that they're going to gain. Look, from my perspective, we have real serious domestic problems that we have to deal with that are more serious than trying to gain some advantage in the Persian Gulf. We have a serious debt problem. We have, an imminent financial crisis, currency crisis, sovereign debt crisis. We have to deal with our homegrown problems. We have to cut government spending dramatically. We have to get our own economic house in order. We have a lot of stuff to do. We don't need these wars. These wars simply distract from solving the actual problems. And they make those problems worse
Yeah, exactly.
by adding the expense of having to fund the war on top of all the other things that we're spending money on that we can't afford. So I think we damage ourselves financially and economically by doing this.
What do you expect to happen to the oil and gas industry if this war goes on? What has the markets priced in so far? The oil prices, as we've talked earlier, have kind of experienced a bit of profit taking. If you look at this, the markets, are they pricing in a war that goes on till the end of this month, or are they expecting the war to end in a few days?
Well, I think they would be pricing in a shorter war. I mean, if you look at where oil prices are now, $73, $74 a barrel as we're talking. Yes, it's higher than it was before the war started. I think we were more like 65 or 63, wherever we were. And that was up, last year, oil ended in the mid 50s, around 55, 56. So oil prices were already rising. And now they've risen a bit more, but they're still cheap. I mean, in the scheme of things, if you look at $5,000 gold, oil at $74 when gold is $5,000 is very, very cheap for oil in relation to the price of gold. So I think we've been quite lucky over the last few years in how inexpensive oil has been. So I think the price has a long way to go to rise, even without the war. So I think that we've not even come close to pricing in a more elongated war that is very disruptive to the supply of oil. And yes, the U.S. could up production, Canada could up production, but we're relatively high cost producers, and for us to significantly increase output, oil companies are going to have to believe that not only are prices going to go higher, but that they're going to stay high for a long time. Because if the oil companies just assume that the war will be over soon, they're not going to invest in increasing capacity and production, because those investments may not pay off if the price of oil doesn't hold up. So you really need prices to move up, and you need oil companies to have confidence that they're not coming back down. And so that could take a while before, they have that confidence. And so that holds off the additional supply.
Maybe you can comment on the price of gold. We saw the same thing happen with gold. People bought gold anticipating the war, and then they sold the news. What do the gold markets tell us on what people are expecting in this war? And what do you expect gold?
I do think that
how do you
there
expect gold
was
to perform if the war goes on?
Yeah, I do think that there was some buying of gold in anticipation of some type of military strike against Iran.
Yeah.
Because I think the Trump administration had made it pretty obvious over the last few weeks that something was going to happen. And the only thing we didn't know is exactly when. The fact that it happened on a Saturday doesn't surprise me. The administration tends to want to do these things when the markets are closed.
Yeah.
And so
always the market, what an element of surprise. Like every country knows it's going to be on the weekend every time.
Yeah. Yeah. And so the market, we attacked. And I think that, people who bought some gold in anticipation of this took profits, especially when gold didn't break above new highs. It didn't really get above 5,500. And then, it was only up like $100, $120. That's not that much. And then, it started to lose some of those gains. And I think people are like, okay, I'm out, right? The upside is, the trade's over. And I think that's what pushed the price of gold back down. But you'll notice, it's still holding above 5,000. The gold market to me looks really strong. What's happening now is just a bunch of noise. It's just short-term trading. But I think the long-term fundamentals for gold were very strong before the war, and the war just makes them stronger. So the reasons to buy gold are stronger than ever now that we've thrown the war into the mix, because the war is going to be good for gold, mainly in that the war will lead to higher inflation. Not because it pushes up the oil price, but because the war will push up government deficit spending to pay for it. And the Fed will print money to cover that cost. And so we're going to get more inflation. Wars always result in governments creating more inflation to pay for them because in many cases, the wars are unpopular. But even if a war is popular, one way to make it unpopular is to tell the public they have to pay for it and then raise their taxes. Say, hey, you know, we need to raise your taxes because we need money for the war. Then a lot of people are going to say, well, you know, I don't really like this war. Not if I got to pay for it. People think they get it for free. So what happens is you have a big expensive war, but the government doesn't raise taxes. In fact, sometimes they cut taxes during the war. And now where does the government get all the money to fight the war and fund the deficits? From the central bank. And then you end up with much higher prices. And so inflation is how you end up paying for a war. And so that's good for gold. I mean, if we're going to have more inflationary fiscal and monetary policies, more people are going to buy gold. That's just the main reason you buy gold, is to escape inflation.
Yeah. Well, talking about gold, last question for you, Peter, is that you debated the founder of Binance a few months ago in December. A lot has happened since, and obviously crypto is not doing too well with this war. What was the outcome of the debate, and what do the markets now tell you about the argument you were making back in December?
Well, you know, gold has gained a lot of ground relative to Bitcoin over the last few months since I had that debate with CZ. But, you know, the purpose of my CZ debate was not really to debate Bitcoin versus gold, although, you know, he tried to turn it into a, you know, Bitcoin gold debate. But I was there to debate Bitcoin versus tokenized gold. Because I think tokenized gold actually solves the main problems that Bitcoin is trying to solve, only a lot better. Because Bitcoin is supposed to be just like gold, except more liquid, more portable, more divisible, more fungible, more verifiable. But all of that is true with tokenized gold. I can transact in a gold token, which represents ownership of gold. So if I want to conduct commerce in gold tokens, if I want to be paid, or if I want to pay, if I want to send or receive gold, and I do it with a token, I can do that much easier than I can with the physical gold. I don't have to be in possession of the gold. You and I don't have to be in the same room. I don't have to shave off a small amount of gold from my big bar. If we agree that we're going to engage in commerce and I'm going to pay you, 3 grams of gold, I just send you 3 grams of gold. I don't have to send the actual gold. I just send the digital representation of ownership of that gold. The gold sits in a vault in Switzerland. I own the gold, but when I send you the token, now you own the gold. And if I can transfer ownership of gold to you instantly, inexpensively, well, then what the hell do I need Bitcoin for? And in fact, the trick that CZ played on me is he slapped this big bar of gold in my hand and asked me if it was real, right? And I can't just tell just based on looking at it. I have no idea who refined it, if it's 100% legitimate. But if it was tokenized gold, I could know instantly if it was legitimate. It would be on a blockchain, and I would know if it was a legitimate token. Now, would I know that the gold that backed it up was real? I would know from audits. I would know from the reputation of the issuer. I would know from the independent audits that verify that the gold that they claim to have on deposit is on deposit. So there's all sorts of ways that you can verify. You don't have to simply trust. But in a free market, companies compete for their brand, for trust. I mean, trust is a valuable asset that businesses will strive to defend and protect. And so if you lose the trust of the public, you lose all that goodwill. So I wanted to debate that, but we really, it really kind of got lost as we were talking.
I haven't watched it. I'll check it out. I saw the virality of him giving you the gold bar, but I didn't check the debate. But Peter, it's a pleasure to speak to you. I'd love to have you on the show again, and hopefully under better circumstances. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, well, hopefully, I hope for a quick end to this war, even though I'm opposed to it, and I don't think it's going to end well. I hope to be proven wrong, and I hope that, this is actually the first time that we get involved in a war in the Middle East, and it doesn't blow up in our face, and we don't create a bigger problem than the one that we're trying to solve. I just, I'm very skeptical based on our track record.
Yeah. Well, I hope so too. Thank you, Peter.
Take care.